Long before the world knew him as the Butcher Baker, Robert Hansen was a soft-spoken misfit from Estherville, Iowa, a small-town boy with a stutter, a rigid father, and a seething resentment that would one day spill into the wilderness of Alaska. On December 7, 1960, Hansen committed his first known crime. He burned down a school bus garage in Pocahontas County. The arson wasn't random. It was revenge, a calculated response to what he later described as relentless bullying during his high school years. Arrested the same day, Hansen was sentenced to 3 years in Anamosa State Penitentiary. He served just 20 months. But what happened behind those prison walls left a lasting impression on the criminal justice system and on those who would come to know his name. During his incarceration, psychiatrists evaluated him and diagnosed Hansen with manic depression and occasional schizophrenic episodes. One psychiatrist described him as having an infantile personality and an obsessive need for revenge. These weren't just clinical observations, they were early warning signs. Yet, Hansen was released back into society, where his first wife promptly divorced him. In the years that followed, Hansen racked up petty theft charges, minor run-ins with the law that were often dismissed as juvenile or insignificant. He remarried in 1963, and 4 years later, he and his new wife moved to Anchorage, Alaska. By all outward appearances, Hansen had turned over a new leaf. He opened a bakery, fathered 2 children, and developed a reputation as a reliable neighbor and dedicated hunter. He even set several hunting records, some of which were later stripped from him. Behind this facade, however, the resentment had only deepened. He was now living in a place where isolation was easy, where the wilderness stretched endlessly, and where secrets could be buried. Then came December 1971. Within the span of just a few weeks, Hansen was arrested twice. First, he abducted a housewife and attempted to rape her. Then, he raped a sex worker. The system responded with leniency. He pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon and the rape charge was dropped in a plea bargain. He received a 5-year sentence, but served only 6 months before being placed on a work release program and then transferred to a halfway house. This pattern, criminal behavior followed by reduced sentences, continued. In 1976, Hansen was caught trying to steal a chainsaw from a local store. Again, he was sentenced to 5 years. Again, he was released early, after the Alaska Supreme Court reduced his sentence, citing time already served. Each release gave him another chance to refine his methods, to perfect the art of deception, and to plan what would become a series of gruesome murders spanning over a decade. Authorities believe Hansen began killing around 1972. His victims were often women on society's margins, sex workers, dancers, runaways. He would lure them in with promises of money or transportation, then overpower them at gunpoint. He'd take them to his home, chain them in the basement, and subject them to days of unspeakable violence. But he didn't stop there. Hansen had a ritual. After the torture, he would fly them, using his small Piper Super Cub plane, to remote areas near the Knik River. There, he'd set them loose in the wilderness, armed with only a hunting rifle and the cold thrill of the chase. Some never made it out of Anchorage. Others, like 18-year-old Celia Van Zanten, came terrifyingly close to escaping. Van Zanten disappeared on December 22, 1971. Her body was found 3 days later, frozen in the wilderness. Authorities believe she died trying to find help after fleeing her abductor. The timeline of her disappearance overlaps with Hansen's assault on a sex worker that same month. Though Hansen denied involvement and no conclusive evidence linked him to Van Zanten, the similarities were chilling. For nearly a decade, Hansen continued his killing spree undetected. His crimes went largely unnoticed, and when women vanished, there were few leads. Bodies turned up occasionally, dumped in shallow graves or scattered across remote areas. But the links between them remained hazy until a teenager named Cindy Paulson broke the silence. On June 13, 1983, Hansen offered Paulson $200 for oral sex. She was 17, alone, and likely saw the money as a lifeline. But once inside his car, she realized the trap. He drew a gun and took her to his home in the quiet Muldoon neighborhood. There, he raped and tortured her before chaining her to a post in the basement. Paulson told investigators he then laid down and took a nap, as if she were no more than an object in his control. Hours later, he forced her into his car again, claiming he would take her to his secluded cabin near the Knik River. He drove her to Merrill Field, where his plane was parked. As he loaded the cockpit, Paulson made her move. Cuffed but determined, she scrambled out of the car, ran barefoot across the tarmac, and fled towards 6th Avenue. She managed to flag down a truck driver named Robert Yount, who immediately sensed something was wrong. Paulson, still in handcuffs and visibly shaken, was taken to the Mush Inn. From there, she called her boyfriend while Yount called the police. Officers found her at the Big Timber Motel, where she had taken a cab in panic. She gave a detailed account of her attacker, describing his home, the interior of his car, and even left behind her sneakers in the vehicle as proof she had been inside. Despite the compelling testimony, the Anchorage Police Department didn't immediately arrest Hansen. He denied everything, claiming Paulson was trying to extort him. His calm demeanor and standing as a local baker made it easy for some officers to believe him. An alibi from his friend John Henning further delayed justice. But Detective Glenn Flother of the Alaska State Troopers wasn't convinced. He had been quietly tracking a series of killings with eerily similar patterns. Bodies had turned up near Eklutna Road, Seward, and the Nick River, each victim showing signs of execution-style murder. The first body, nicknamed Eklutna Annie, remained unidentified. Then came Joanna Messina and Sherry Morrow. All were young women. All had vanished under similar circumstances. The breakthrough was near. But Hansen still walked free. And the forest still hid its secrets. By the fall of 1983, the wilderness was no longer whispering. It was screaming. Detective Glenn Flother could feel it. Something sinister was buried beneath the permafrost of Alaska's remote reaches. The women turning up dead weren't just victims of random violence. They were pieces of a puzzle. And Robert Hansen, with his boy-next-door charm and a trophy wall to rival any predator, was quickly becoming impossible to ignore. Flother now had the FBI profile. He had Cindy Paulson's eyewitness account. He had a suspect who matched both. Hansen's quiet reputation as a baker belied his double life, one filled with deceit, obsession, and bloodshed. Flother pushed forward. He secured a warrant to search Hansen's home, plane, and vehicles. On October 27, 1983, investigators entered Hansen's modest Anchorage residence. At first glance, it looked like any other suburban home. But the attic told a different story. Hidden behind insulation and wooden beams was a chilling collection of items, jewelry, personal trinkets, and multiple firearms. Tucked away in this secret corner was the weapon that would later be confirmed as the tool of Hansen's trade, a Ruger Mini .14 rifle. Cold, precise, lethal. Then came the discovery that shattered any lingering doubt. Folded behind Hansen's bedframe was an aeronautical map of southern Alaska. It looked ordinary until detectives noticed the marks, 37 small X's etched into the landscape. The pattern was too deliberate to be random. Many of those marks coincided with known recovery sites of missing women. Others, still unchecked, hinted at future discoveries waiting beneath the soil. Faced with mounting evidence, Hansen tried to maintain his innocence. He deflected, minimized, blamed. But with each item brought forth, each victim's necklace, each bullet casing, each identified location, his resistance crumbled. When he finally began to talk, the horrors unraveled faster than anyone could have imagined. Hansen admitted to a series of attacks beginning in the early 1970s. The women he targeted weren't selected by chance. He chose them carefully, often favoring sex workers or runaways, those less likely to be reported missing, those who could vanish without igniting a citywide search. But not all were from the margins. Some were local girls, just teenagers, caught in the crosshairs of a man with a hunter's patience and a killer's resolve. His process was methodical. After gaining their trust, he would threaten them with a weapon and transport them to his home. There, the assaults began, brutal, sustained, and humiliating. For the few he chose to spare, he would later blindfold them and release them into the Alaskan wilderness. To Hansen, it was a game. A deadly one. He would track them through the trees, across frozen creeks and windswept tundra, using his high-powered rifle and decades of hunting expertise. Most never made it more than a mile. He took pride in his ability to stalk. His kills weren't rushed. He relished the chase, the illusion of control, the begging, the raw fear. The cold didn't bother him. He knew the land better than most and could navigate its terrain like second nature. His victims, disoriented and exhausted, didn't stand a chance. Among the victims whose remains were eventually tied to Hansen were Joanna Messina, found near a gravel pit in Seward, Sherry Morrow, whose shallow grave near the Nick River held more than just bones, it told a story of suffering, and Paula Goulding, another woman taken far from safety and executed as part of his twisted ritual. Forensic testing, aerial surveys, and Hansen's own confessions eventually led authorities to many of the locations marked on the map. Bodies, some skeletonized, others partially preserved by the cold, were recovered from desolate riverbanks, isolated forests, and remote glacial plains. Each discovery confirmed what the authorities feared: Hansen had turned Alaska into his personal killing ground. The precise number of his victims remains uncertain. While Hansen confessed to murdering 17 women and raping 30 more, investigators believe the true count could be higher. Not every X on that map has yielded remains. Some sites remain unreachable, lost beneath ice and snow. Some women have never been identified. It wasn't just the number of killings that stunned the public. It was the sheer organization behind them. Hansen wasn't a man who lost control. He planned every step, every lie, every flight into the wilderness. He operated within a system he'd designed, one that protected his secrets for more than a decade. And all the while, no one suspected a thing. In court, Hansen tried to manipulate the narrative. He claimed he only killed women who resisted, implying that their fate was somehow their fault. He painted himself as misunderstood, even provoked. But the physical evidence dismantled his defense. The jewelry in his attic didn't lie. The victims' stories, pieced together through recovered remains and survivor testimony, left no room for excuses. When the full story reached the public, it sent shockwaves through Anchorage and beyond. A city that once saw Hansen as a family man, a baker, a soft-spoken friend, now reeled from the revelation. The man behind the counter had been disappearing women for years, leading them into the woods, stripping them of their dignity, and leaving them to die in the frozen stillness of the Alaskan frontier. In the aftermath, law enforcement scrambled to connect unsolved disappearances from the 1970s and early 1980s. Families who had waited years for answers finally knew what happened. For others, the truth still remains buried somewhere off the map, quite literally. The court charged Hansen with multiple counts of assault, kidnapping, rape, and murder. In a plea agreement designed to avoid further trials and give closure to victims' families, he admitted to the murders of 17 women. In exchange, he was spared the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to 461 years, plus life, without the possibility of parole. He was incarcerated at Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward until 2014, when he was moved due to health issues. He died of natural causes later that year. Though Hansen never got the infamy he perhaps once fantasized about, his crimes became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder that monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear aprons, greet neighbors with a smile, and live right next door. But Alaska would never forget what he did. The ground he once stalked still holds secrets. And the final X on his map may never be found. Even after Robert Hansen was locked away, Alaska wasn't done uncovering his past. His confession had opened the door, but much of what lay behind it remained a mystery. He had admitted to killing 17 women, but the map found behind his headboard suggested there were more, each X a silent accusation carved into the wilderness. Detectives continued scouring the forest, the rivers, the gravel pits and ridges, any place accessible only by small aircraft or brutal hikes. The cold made it harder. Time made it worse. Bones shifted. Animals disturbed remains. Yet, year after year, the ground yielded fragments of the truth. The horror of Hansen's crimes wasn't just the killings. It was the patience, the planning, the precision with which he turned Alaska's vast beauty into a personal hunting ground. Though his trial focused on 4 confirmed murders, Sherry Morrow, Joanna Messina, Paula Goulding, and Eklutna Annie, the still unidentified woman found near Eklutna Road, Hansen was suspected in the disappearances of at least 21 others. Some of them were never located, and their names still appear only in missing persons reports. Forensic analysts, guided by the map, recovered partial remains at over a dozen marked sites, but without DNA or identification, many were listed as Jane Does. His victims came from different places, different paths. But nearly all had one thing in common: they were vulnerable. Teenagers who had run from home. Dancers working late nights in Anchorage. Sex workers who vanished without a headline. They trusted the wrong man. He used charm like bait, and once he had them, escape became fantasy. In the interrogation room, Hansen described his crimes with a disturbing sense of order. He spoke of flights into the Nick River Valley, of remote sandbars and silent woods. He recalled their cries, the moments they realized they were being hunted, the way fear changed the way they ran. He showed no sorrow. He never looked away. His family left Alaska. His bakery shuttered. Those who knew him, neighbors, friends, customers, were left reckoning with the fact that the man who had given them fresh bread each morning had, by night, been burying lives in the snow. No one had suspected a thing. Hansen remained in Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward for the rest of his life. The facility, surrounded by fences and frigid winds, kept him contained, but not forgotten. Victims' families wanted answers he could never fully provide. Not because he didn't know, but because he chose to control what he revealed. He understood that even from prison, information was a currency he could spend. He died in 2014, aged 75, from natural causes. There was no ceremony, no public tribute, no mourning crowd. His ashes were scattered quietly. The man who once ruled the wilds from a cockpit left no mark on the world but scars and grief. Yet the map remains. Not in the evidence room, but in the minds of those who study serial offenders. 37 XS, 37 possibilities. Not all were confirmed. Not all will be. Some bones have disintegrated. Some families may never know what happened. But the map tells its own story. A hunter marked his kills. Not animals. People. And it's that truth, that chilling, irreversible truth, that haunts law enforcement still. Hansen wasn't impulsive. He wasn't chaotic. He was deliberate. That's what made him deadly. He exploited the trust of women society had already cast aside. And he knew the odds of someone believing them were slim. He relied on their silence. He bet on their invisibility. And he won, for years. But in the end, he miscalculated. Cindy Paulson broke that silence. Her escape was more than a personal victory, it was the unraveling of a decade-long secret buried beneath glacier and gravel. Her courage forced open a file that had gathered too much dust. She was 17 years old, handcuffed and terrified, but she ran. And that sprint on 6th Avenue did what years of investigation couldn't. It exposed Robert Hansen for what he was. The butcher baker. A predator disguised as a father. A killer posing as a craftsman. A man who used Alaska's boundless wilderness not as a place to live, but as a place to kill. And long after his death, that wilderness still remembers. Thank you for listening to Crime Echoes with Lewis. Please like and subscribe for more true crime content like this.